Turning now to the very latest on Syria. The United Nations Security Council will soon hold an emergency meeting on the suspected chemical weapons attack. President Trump is weighing a military response to Saturday's deadly assault. He met with top military officials and advisors last night, and he's working closely with U.S. allies. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin has the latest from the Pentagon.
President Trump spoke with the British Prime Minister last night, and the two leaders agreed President Assad has a history of using chemical weapons, and something has to be done to stop him from doing it again.
I believe there was a chemical attack, and we're looking for the actual evidence.
The pictures of the aftermath of last weekend's suspected chemical attack in Syria that killed 42 and injured over 500 are compelling. But two critical questions remain. What kind of chemical and who was responsible? CBS News analyst Mike Morrell.
And if the president is going to take military action, the intelligence community would want to give him a high confidence judgment.
Intelligence analysts have concluded the symptoms shown in the videos are consistent with exposure to chlorine gas, and that some of the victims look like they had been exposed to a nerve agent. But that's not enough.
You can only really nail it down when you get a blood sample that you have confidence in where that blood sample came from and what the chain of custody was.
U.S. officials say blood samples provided by hospital workers do indeed confirm the presence of chemicals, but they need to be sure the evidence hasn't been doctored.
Assad's never been stronger than he is today, so the opposition would want nothing more right now than to significantly weaken him with a U.S. airstrike.
Over the past 6 months, U.S. intelligence has confirmed 4 other chemical attacks carried out by the regime, but none of them triggered a military response. The stakes are higher this time because Russia has warned the U.S. not to strike.
I do think there's a possibility here of a military confrontation between the United States and Russia in Syria.
An international team of chemical weapons experts is scheduled to arrive at the scene of the attack tomorrow. They could find soil samples that prove what kinds of chemicals were used, but that still would not answer the question of who is responsible. Anne-Marie?
David Martin, thank you. For more now, I want to bring in Robert Richer. He's from Amman, Jordan. He's the former Associate Deputy Director for Operations at the CIA, and he's also an analyst for Cypher Brief, a global security platform and website. Thank you so much for joining us. Robert, should the U.S. and our allies follow through with a strategic military strike on Syria? Will it make a difference?
Well, it depends on how we define a strategic strike. The last strike that was taken by the president took out a couple runways, damaged a couple hangars, but had no major effect on the Syrian military. We've now had 5 to 10 days, well, excuse me, we've had about 5 days where the Syrians have had a chance to move their equipment, get major military aircraft and others under either Russian air defense control or move them around the country. So it would depend on how we define a strategic attack. If it's taking out command and control, are we going to go after Assad's palace structure? Are we going to go against the Minister of Defense? I think it depends on how we define it. But to have impact, we're going to have to hurt them. And we haven't hurt them seriously with the last rounds of attacks.
So then what are the risks, though, associated with a missile attack that will hurt them, targeting his palace structure, or something more significant?
Well, the risks are serious. He's got 2 countries that are his patrons. Assad has 2 countries that are his patrons right now, Iran and Russia. Both have equities and interests in the country. The Russians have made Syria their gambit for major influence in the Middle East. So that they're going to see any strong strategic attack, as Putin has already said, against Syria as an attack against them. So there's serious consequences for any attack, particularly any attack that impacts Russian or Iranian elements.
So, Robert, in your experience, then, how would you advise the president? Is a military option the best option, or should he be exploring something else?
Well, I think the first thing I would have advised the president would be to kind of follow the words of Teddy Roosevelt, which was speak softly and carry a big stick. I think we've lost some of the potential for us to have real impact by talking about it for the days that we have talked about it. In terms of having impact, we actually need to have both a military and a political strategy. Syria and our role in Syria has been suffering from benign neglect for almost 4 years. The last 2 years of the President Obama administration basically stopped or kept at one position our support to the opposition forces. Political dialogue had stopped. And now for the last 18 months of this current administration, or close to 18 months of this current administration, it's been not benign neglect, it's been confusing neglect. Contradictory statements, talk about withdrawal, talk about lack of support for our Kurdish allies and opposition groups. So a consistent political message and a political strategy is needed for any type of military strategy as well going forward.
So here's the thing, though, Robert. We can't talk about Syria without talking about Russia. It was Russia that the U.S. depended on to clean out these chemical weapons last year after the chemical strike last year. That didn't happen. Can we expect any change in this country without the cooperation of Russia?
No, we cannot. Russia has to be a player. In fact, Russia actually has to be a driving player to make this happen. We've lost our ability to drive it ourselves.
You know, the president has said that he wants to pull troops out of Syria. At the same time, he has also said that he wants military strikes in the country. Just how do we prevent this from becoming sort of the next Iraq or Afghanistan, where, you know, there's chaos and terror groups kind of find an opening in there, and we can't stop them?
Well, as we've seen from Iraq, and we see in the aftermath of Libya, there is no real plan in terms of what happens when Assad falls. To be honest with you, there are many people in the region who believe that we're better off with Assad in charge, as we might have been if Saddam was still in charge, and to use political leverage, continued sanctions, and other methods to get them to make some type of accommodation with opposition elements. At this point, Assad is resuming control of a good portion of the country. He and the Russians are trying to bring some stability in the areas they now control, and they're eyeing expanding that control to the rest of his country. There is no major opposition element that can replace Assad in any form. There was some in Iraq, so we had people to draw on. There's really no elements that are substantive that could be or moderate in nature that would work to a democratic process if Assad was to step down or make accommodations.
All right, Robert Richer, thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.